the short journey to Westminster Abbey for a state funeral. President Biden given dispensation to use his bomb-proof car. But inside the Abbey, Commonwealth leaders and royalty took precedence. In the bottom of the picture, you see the US President ushered further and further back to row 14. Former Prime Ministers together again, as they were for the Accession Council, proclaiming Charles king just over a week ago. Amongst the last to arrive at the Abbey, two of the Queen's great-grandchildren. Prince George, now second in line to the throne. Outside Parliament, the coffin on the state gun carriage, last used at the state funeral of Winston Churchill in 1965. Pulled by tradition, by naval ratings. "40 march behind to act as brakes. The Queen's children, and behind them her grandchildren, lined up to walk behind the coffin. The coffin arrived at the Abbey for a funeral decades in the planning. With the Buckingham Palace card, now the residence of the King, it read, "In loving and devoted memory." The hymns and the readings were all in line with the Queen's wishes. Liz Truss, who she appointed as Prime Minister 2 days before her death, read the second lesson. Trumpets announced a 2-minute silence. The cameras picked out former prime ministers and cabinet ministers. And amongst the European monarchs in the prime seats, behind the candle, Spain's disgraced former king, Juan Carlos. Anthem, a lament from a lone piper. The coffin was then carried out and placed back on the state gun carriage. It was pulled from Westminster Abbey to the Wellington Arch at Hyde Park Corner. Prince George and Princess Charlotte looked on from a car behind. Applause broke out all the way along the route. Then, past the Albert Memorial, the journey to Windsor in the State Hearse. Some of London's busiest routes closed, lined with people, throwing flowers, cheering, taking photos. At the bottom of the screen, you can see a horse's tail catch an RAF bandsman in the face. One brief, unscripted moment in a day of clockwork ceremonial. Inside the walls of the castle, the Queen's corgis. And again, arranged for a final march behind their mother and grandmother, the 4 children and grandsons. And for the Grenadier Guardsmen who've been pallbearers at Westminster Hall, Westminster Abbey, now their most challenging ordeal, ascending into St George's Chapel. The orb and sceptre, fastened to the coffin since the lying-in state, were now removed and placed on the altar, along with the imperial state crown. And in a final ceremonial act, the Lord Chamberlain, Lord Parker, former head of MI5, broke his wand of office and placed it on the Queen's coffin. Then, as a psalm was read, the coffin descended to its final resting place in the royal family vault of St George's. After the piper's lament, the first verse of God Save the King.
Position. And as the minute gun fired and the Sebastopol bell tolled, in the distance, the final procession began. Before the hearse, they watched the Grenadier Guards carry the Queen's company colour up towards the castle where she'd spent so much of her childhood. And as the procession swayed slowly towards the King George IV gate, there was a ripple of applause in its wake.
amazing. I don't think you'll ever see anything like that.
Said. And when there was silence, it was arresting. And then into a chapel under whose tiles lie the remains of 3 centuries of monarchs, they carried the longest reigning of them all. There were 800 in St. George's Chapel, many of them members of the late Queen, on her coffin, moments before it was lowered into the vault.
Thus it hath pleased Almighty God to take out of this transitory life unto his divine mercy the late, most high, most mighty, and most excellent monarch, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of her other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, and sovereign of the most noble Order of the Garter.